The miracle doctor won't be a kept man. My heart belongs ashore. Chapter 901. The Ludwig family of four was terrified. Kiran York was like a homicidal maniac. Yvonne Quinn was somewhat better off, having become accustomed to such scenes. She supported the trembling Maxine Danes beside her. Lindsay Ludwig looked at her phone, which she was using to time, feeling as if it was a death knell. She knew Kiran was domineering, but she hadn't expected him to be this ruthless. Some of Park Sung-nam's men, unable to bear the immense pressure, started to scream in anger and despair. Park Sung-nam himself looked as if he had been struck dumb, staring wide-eyed at the scene unfolding before him. 500 billion! Pay to live! Kiran demanded, holding up 5 fingers with a cold, arrogant smile. Park Sung-nam's heart shattered. His lips moved several times, but he didn't dare to argue. Give them an account number, Kiran instructed Lindsay. It felt like a dream to Lindsay as she mechanically nodded and gave Park Sung-nam an account number. Seeing the account and thinking about the 500 billion, Park Sung-nam's heart ached. However, looking at Kiran and then at his struggling subordinates, his fear grew. Fine, I'll pay right now, he shouted, his voice trembling as he made the call to transfer the money. His hands shook, and his speech was stammering as he struggled to get the words out. Eventually, he took a photo of the account details and sent it off. All of Park Sung-nam's arrogance vanished. He was now like a stray dog begging for its life. 15 minutes later, Lindsay received the confirmation of the transfer. She nodded to Kiran. Without saying a word, Kiran walked towards Park Sung-nam. Feeling the intense pressure from Kiran, Park Sung-nam backed away nervously. I paid the money. Are you still going to kill me? He asked. Kiran didn't respond, continuing to walk towards him. Park Sung-nam felt as if he was facing the Grim Reaper, his body enveloped in the shadow of death. The overwhelming presence of Kiran made him collapse to his knees with a thud. Seeing Park Sung-nam kneel, his men followed suit, their legs giving way as they knelt in front of Kiran, all the bravado gone. The cars they had arrived in, which once seemed imposing, now looked out of place as they knelt, like dogs begging for mercy. Kiran raised his hand slowly. Seeing this, Park Sung-nam cried out in fear, raising his hands. Spare me! Please spare me! His breakdown triggered the others, who also began to cry and beg for their lives. Witnessing this, Finn was deeply moved. Park Sung-nam had come with the best warriors of Stick Nation to kill Kiran, but ended up paying for his life. True strength belonged to someone like Kiran. Park Sung-nam, seeing Kiran's hand not lowering, felt a bit relieved. Kiran grabbed him, pulling him up. Are you feeling resentful? He asked. Though filled with resentment, Park Sung-nam quickly shook his head. No, I accept my fate. Kiran turned to Lindsay. Get your phone ready. Record this exciting scene, he instructed. Not knowing what Kiran planned, Lindsay quickly pulled out her phone and pointed it at them. Park Sung-nam, fearing for his life, heard exciting and thought Kiran intended to kill him, causing him to lose control of his bladder and bowels. Some of his men were equally terrified, sitting down in shock. At this moment, Kiran seemed like the reincarnation of Zhang Fei at Changban Bridge, scaring away thousands with just his presence. Unable to bear the pressure, Park Sung-nam began to cry loudly. Now, I'll give you a chance to live, Kiran said slowly. I have no more money. I really have no more money. If you want more, just take my life, Park Sung-nam begged. Your life isn't worth anything to me, Kiran replied coldly. I don't care about it, Park Sung-nam sighed in relief, looking pitifully at Kiran. Now, on camera, curse your business partners and threaten to kill them, Kiran ordered. Hearing this demand, Park Sung-nam felt even more relieved. He thought of how his partners, Kanta Yasuda and the others, looked down on him and how pathetic he now appeared. If they knew, they'd laugh at him even more. Fueled by his anger, he shouted, Davis, Elton, Kanta Yasuda, you're all dogs. You're worse than me. I'll kill you all. He vented his anger at his partners instead of Kiran. Did you get that? Kiran asked Lindsay. Nodding quickly, Lindsay replayed the recording to ensure it was captured properly. Listening to his own angry words, Park Sung-nam felt a mix of complex emotions, pain, and frustration. Kiran, satisfied, released him. Park Sung-nam collapsed to the ground, his legs weak. Kneel before me, Kiran ordered coldly. Scrambling, Park Sung-nam knelt obediently. His men followed suit, kneeling in front of Kiran. You have one last chance to live, Kiran said coldly. Confused by Kiran's demands, Park Sung-nam and his men could only nod frantically. In 10 days, go to Sunland and retrieve the Stick Nation stones from the Pagoda of Nations, Kiran ordered. Stunned, Park Sung-nam and his men looked at each other, confirming they hadn't misheard. Yvonne's eyes lit up with understanding. Demolishing the pagoda should be Kiran's responsibility alone. She realized Kiran intended to use them to dismantle the pagoda of nations, removing the stick nation stones first to lead by example since they attacked first. Admiringly, she looked at Kiran, understanding his strategic mind. Though unclear about Kiran's motives, Park Sung-nam and his men agreed to the task, thinking it was about retrieving their nation's stones. Remember, if you fail, the recording will be posted online, Kiran warned. Imagining the consequences of the video being leaked, Park Sung-nam knew his partners would despise him and might even kill him. Gritting his teeth, he agreed. We'll get it done. Kiran nodded and pointed to the corpses on the ground. Clean this up and get out. Scrambling to their feet, Park Sung-nam and his men cleaned the area and drove away in a hurry. They had arrived with arrogance and dominance but left in disgrace, like beaten dogs. They had lost men, paid a ransom, and now had to do Kiran's bidding. In the face of true strength, the weak could only act foolishly. Park Sung-nam had been just such a fool. Kiran's deep gaze followed them, anticipating the completion of their task. Chapter 902. The villa had returned to silence, with a gentle breeze blowing through, but the air still carried the scent of blood. An ongoing sense of terror gripped Finn Ludwig and Maxine Danes. Recalling the massacre of the York family, they both felt a sense of fortunate survival, knowing that if Kiran York had wanted to kill them, they would not have escaped death. Kiran looked at Finn and said, "If any other backers from Power Hub Investment Group show up, notify me immediately." "What do you plan to do with those people?" Finn asked cautiously. There's only one word for their fate. Death. Kiran's final word was uttered with overwhelming dominance, his killing intent palpable. Finn felt a wave of emotion. Distant relatives are not as good as close neighbors. For those two countries we have no shared interests, Kiran said, looking at the night sky. If they come, it's to die. They can't even compare to Park Sung-nam, who can at least be a dog. Finn remained silent, internally agreeing with Kiran. Though he didn't fully understand the Pagoda of Nations or Kiran's intentions, he knew that having Park Sung-nam handle it was fitting. After all, it was a matter between Stick Nation and Sunland, a perfect scenario of mutual destruction. "Don't worry. If they dare to come, I'll inform you right away," Finn promised. Kiran nodded slightly. Just then, his phone rang. Seeing that it was Sophia Carter calling, he assumed it was about her mother, Macy Wendell, and answered, "What happened?" "My grandfather informed us that the family is having a meeting tomorrow, and we all need to attend." Sophia's voice revealed clear unease and tension. She hesitantly asked, "Master, can you wake my father?" Kiran thought of Cedric Brew being dead, and it was time to wake Randall Carter, Sophia's father. "Just wait for me," he said, hanging up. Turning to Yvonne Quinn, he said, "We're going to Sophia's house to wake her father." Yvonne nodded, stood up, and prepared to leave with Kiran. Finn said to Kiran, "Randall Carter is a very righteous man. If he had been chosen as the heir back then, the Carter family would be different now." Kiran did not immediately respond, but looked at Finn with a thoughtful expression. "The Carter family are deep waters, hiding many things," Finn added, looking at Kiran, his eyes full of caution. Kiran remained silent, his expression growing more serious. Kiran and Yvonne left the Ludwig residence and headed to Sophia's house. When they arrived, Sophia was already anxiously waiting at the villa's entrance. Seeing Kiran and Yvonne, she quickly ran over and greeted, "Hello, master and mistress." Hearing mistress, Kiran's mouth twitched, clearly uncomfortable. Yvonne, however, was pleased and smiled as she took Sophia's hand. "I missed you today," she said. Kiran almost fainted. Was that just a lie for being called mistress? Sophia was delighted, hugging Yvonne's arm. "Mistress is the best. Then let her remove your father's goo poison," Kiran said, turning away. Sophia, now worried, thought Kiran was angry and quickly released Yvonne, grabbing Kiran's arm and pleading, "Master, please don't be angry. Please save my father." Yvonne, smiling, watched Kiran and said, "If you don't help, then I will." Kiran nodded to Yvonne. "You go ahead. I'll wait." Sophia, confused by their exchange, watched as Yvonne went inside and followed her. Kiran waited outside, knowing that Yvonne could remove the goo poison more easily than he could. As he waited, he recalled Finn's parting words, "The Carter family are deep waters." Sophia's mother, Madeline Carter, and her husband, Philip Wise, as well as their son, Robert Wise, had all been dealt with. What could Finn mean by the Carter family having deep waters? Considering Finn's knowledge of various families, his warning was likely not baseless. At that moment, Macy Wendell appeared before Kiran. Seeing a hint of regret in her eyes, Kiran found it strange. They were saving her husband. Why wasn't she happy? "You shouldn't wake my husband," Macy said, her tone filled with sorrow and helplessness. Kiran remained silent, waiting for her explanation. Taking a deep breath, Macy looked at Kiran and said, "I am no longer pure. If he wakes up, I can't face him." Kiran felt uncomfortable hearing this. A couple should stand by each other in difficult times, shouldn't they? Was she planning to abandon him now that trouble had come? Due to the heavenly silkworm goo, Macy had undergone several transformations, losing memory of past events and remaining in a 20-year-old's mindset. How could she say something so thoughtful? Could this be a scam? Finn's warning about deep waters, coupled with Mace's words, made Kiran wary. He stared at her, waiting for more explanation. After a moment of contemplation, Macy continued, "He's been in a coma for years. There's no longer any love between us." Kiran nodded slightly, understanding her point. "If you wake him, he'll naturally get involved in the Carter family's affairs, bringing more trouble and unrest to our lives." Macy sighed and said, "Joshua and Sophia have grown up. They can pursue their own freedom now. Why tie them to the Carter family's burdens?" Kiran remained silent, agreeing somewhat with Macy's point. "Entering a wealthy family is like entering the depths of the sea," Macy said with a bitter smile. "As descendants of a big family, it's truly difficult. Rather than being painfully entangled, it's better to remain ignorant." Kiran felt a sense of loss at her words. He observed Macy's face and said, "You know how to wake Sophia's father, yet you don't do it." Macy did not deny it, nodding in acknowledgement. "Yes, it's better not to see than to see, and better not to wake than to wake." Kiran's heart pounded. He stared at Macy and asked, "Where did your goo poison come from?" Macy's expression turned conflicted and pensive. Chapter 903. "I don't know where the goo poison came from," Macy Wendell said after a few seconds of silence, looking at Kiran York. Kiran's face showed a faint smile as he gazed at Macy. "The goo poison in you is very peculiar." Macy was stunned, looking at Kiran. Kiran didn't say anything further and turned to Yvonne Quinn, who had just walked out. "All done," Yvonne said to Kiran, adjusting her jacket as if she felt a chill. "Mom, Dad is awake. Come quickly." Sophia Carter called to her mother, Macy, with joy and urgency. Macy's face showed a complex array of emotions. She glanced at Kiran again, clearly curious about the strange goo poison he mentioned. However, Kiran said nothing more and walked with Yvonne towards the car. Macy found the current Kiran not only hard to understand but also somewhat astonishing. Yvonne, focused on saving people, hadn't noticed Kiran's thoughts and was full of questions as she followed him out. Once in the car, Yvonne looked at Kiran and asked, "Did something happen just now?" Instead of answering directly, Kiran asked, "If I were poisoned and about to die, would you want me to die?" "Of course I'd want you to wake up." "Why would I want you to stay like that forever?" Yvonne replied, her beautiful face showing a touch of reproach, clearly unhappy with Kiran's question. Hearing this, Kiran felt an inexplicable surge of emotion. "What exactly happened?" Yvonne pressed. "Macy thinks we shouldn't wake her husband," Kiran replied. Yvonne's brows furrowed in confusion, and she fell silent for a moment before asking, "Do they not love each other?" "I'm not sure, but I feel something is off," Kiran responded. "What do you think is the problem?" Yvonne asked. When I asked Macy where her goo poison came from, her expression changed, but she didn't say anything. "We forgot to ask Sue Walton. She might know," Yvonne said regretfully. "I doubt Sue Walton would know. If it were 30 years old, she would have been a child and not capable of using goo poison. But the person who poisoned Macy might be related to her, and she might know," Yvonne suggested. Kiran didn't refute Yvonne's reasoning, but instead asked, "Is the heavenly silkworm goo considered a good or bad goo poison in your Maui?" "It's neither good nor bad, but, if possible, I'd like to have the heavenly silkworm goo myself," Yvonne said with a hint of longing in her eyes. Kiran was taken aback and looked at Yvonne. "What do you mean?" "Although the heavenly silkworm goo undergoes periodic transformations that keep a person's memory at a certain age, it also makes them eternally young and beautiful." "Isn't that wonderful?" she said, glancing outside with a hint of envy in her eyes. "Even after death, if the heavenly silkworm goo survives, it might even bring a person back to life. Could it be that miraculous? If a person dies, wouldn't the goo die too? The person is the host for the goo," Kiran argued. "Not necessarily. Maybe it could bring them back," Yvonne insisted. Hearing this, Kiran's expression changed slightly. He turned to Yvonne and asked seriously, "If it really could bring someone back, do you think Lady Meiji would use this method?" "Lady Meiji?" Yvonne's face turned serious, matching Kiran's tone. Kiran nodded to her. "Isn't Lady Meiji trying to come back to life? If possible, do you think she wouldn't want to?" Yvonne fell silent, contemplating his words. Back then, Sunland could take away the Maui tribe's demon-suppressing stone. "Do you think they wouldn't know about the heavenly silkworm goo?" Kiran continued to probe. Yvonne slowly turned to look at Kiran, deep in thought. "Are you suggesting that Sue Walton was looking for the heavenly silkworm goo?" Kiran didn't respond verbally, but his changing expression seemed to agree with Yvonne's hypothesis. Did Sue Walton return to Sunland because she learned about the heavenly silkworm goo? Yvonne speculated further. Kiran's expression grew more serious, agreeing with her deduction. Otherwise, why would Sue Walton care so much about Cedric Brew and even serve as his housekeeper? Cedric could use goo poison, but Sue Walton was practically the master of goo poison. A master wouldn't care about a mere practitioner. Both fell into silence, each pondering the situation deeply. Even as they drove back to the villa, they couldn't come up with a satisfactory explanation. Returning to their respective rooms, Kiran fell asleep quickly. Yvonne stayed awake, worried that Lady Meiji might attack Kiran in his dreams. Only after a long while, seeing Kiran sleep soundly, did she finally drift off. Meanwhile, at Randall Carter's home, there was a scene of joy. After years in a coma, Randall had woken up, seeing his grown children and still beautiful wife, filling his heart with happiness. He looked at his wife, Macy, with gratitude. "It's been hard on you, raising our children alone all these years." Macy gave a serene smile, showing her elegance. "We're husband and wife. There's no need for such formal gratitude." She then took out a set of white loungewear from the wardrobe and said, "Change into these clothes." "Kids, let your dad rest." Sophia and her brother Joshua wisely left the room. Left alone, Randall stood up and opened his arms to hug Macy. Macy instinctively stiffened and tried to pull away, a small action that didn't escape Randall's notice, making him feel a sense of distance. Macy quickly recovered, smiling charmingly. "It's been so long, I'm not used to it." Randall laughed, feeling relieved by her explanation, and hugged her. "It's a miracle we're together again after so many years. I feel reborn." Macy leaned into his embrace, softly saying, "Let's get you dressed." Happy with his wife's care. Randall, not thinking much, put on the clothes she handed him. The fabric felt smooth and luxurious, though he couldn't identify the material. However, as soon as he put on the clothes, he felt an intense itch all over his body, followed by a deep, bone-penetrating pain. Unable to bear it, he let out a horrific scream and collapsed to the ground. Macy hurriedly opened the door, shouting to Sophia and Joshua, "What happened to your father?" Chapter 904. Joshua and Sophia were initially elated that their father had finally awakened after years of being in a coma. They breathed a sigh of relief. However, their mother's sudden shout startled them. They hurriedly ran into the room. "Mom, what's wrong?" Sophia shouted. Seeing her father lying unconscious on the floor, she ran over, tears streaming down her face, and hugged her father, crying out, "Dad, what's wrong?" Randall lay motionless on the ground, blood dripping from his mouth. Macy Wendell was also anxious and worried. She said to her children, "I don't know what happened, he just collapsed unconscious after changing his clothes." "Call Kiran York quickly," Joshua urged his sister. Sophia took out her phone and quickly dialed Kiran's number. Kiran, who was sleeping with his phone nearby, was awakened by the ringing. Seeing Sophia's name on the screen, he immediately answered. "What happened?" Sophia cried. "My father suddenly collapsed and is spitting blood." "I'm on my way," Kiran said, hanging up and jumping out of bed. Yvonne Quinn, who had been lightly sleeping and not fully asleep, quickly came out of the room upon hearing the commotion. "Sophia's father suddenly collapsed and is spitting blood," Kiran explained to Yvonne. "We should go check it out," Yvonne said, her brows furrowed in concern. Kiran also looked puzzled. He hadn't anticipated such a turn of events. Randall's goo poison wasn't severe and should have been easy to cure, especially with Yvonne's help. If not for Cedric Brew, they would have resolved the goo poison long ago. But now, this minor goo poison had unexpectedly led to such a situation. "Maybe you were right. Macy Wendell is indeed strange," Yvonne said as she got into the car, looking at Kiran. Kiran's expression grew more serious. Could she really be connected to Lady Meiji? "Do you think she might actually be Lady Meiji?" Yvonne asked boldly, looking at Kiran. Kiran's face reflected his deep contemplation as he considered Yvonne's suggestion. Yvonne nodded firmly. "I truly suspect it." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "The heavenly silkworm goo is the best choice for someone seeking resurrection." "If she is Lady Meiji, wouldn't Sue Walton have noticed?" Kiran asked. "Sue Walton isn't infallible. She could have been deceived," Yvonne replied. Kiran fell silent, speeding up the car. Yvonne didn't press the topic further, but she knew Kiran was now suspicious. When they arrived at the Carter residence, they heard cries from inside as soon as they entered the villa grounds. Before they could even turn off the car, Sophia ran out, crying, "Master, mistress, please save my father." Seeing Sophia's tear-streaked, anxious face, Kiran and Yvonne knew the situation was dire. "Don't worry. We'll save your father," Yvonne said softly, comforting Sophia. Sophia's tension eased slightly, and she nodded expectantly. Kiran and Yvonne quickly went upstairs to Randall's room. Randall had been placed on the bed but was still spitting blood. Joshua was busy cleaning up with tissues. Macy stood nearby, crying. Kiran and Yvonne both glanced at Macy's tearful face, which seemed genuine. "Please save my father," Joshua pleaded, looking at Kiran with tears in his eyes. Kiran didn't respond immediately. He quickly stepped forward and placed his hand on Randall's wrist. Randall's pulse was very weak, and he was barely alive. Kiran pulled out silver needles and quickly administered several acupuncture points on Randall's body. The bleeding stopped, but Randall remained very weak. Sophia and Joshua anxiously watched Kiran, hoping he could revive their father. Macy's gaze swept over Kiran, showing no change in expression. Yvonne quickly approached to check Randall's condition. Soon, her brows furrowed in confusion as she looked at Kiran. Kiran also showed confusion and returned Yvonne's gaze. Yvonne blinked at Kiran, indicating through their mental connection that Randall had been sabotaged. Kiran shared the same suspicion. He glanced over Randall's body and noticed the changed clothes. The white loungewear appeared to be ordinary, but it had not been stained red by the blood Randall had vomited. Even though there were a few drops, it seemed odd that the fabric wasn't soaked. Kiran found this strange. Running his hand over the fabric, it felt as smooth as silk. Turning to Sophia, Kiran said, "Bring me some water." Sophia didn't understand why Kiran needed water, but obediently brought a cup. Kiran lifted Randall slightly, pretending to help him drink, but purposely spilled the water. The water rolled off the loungewear without soaking it. Kiran quickly handed the cup back to Sophia and said, "Get some tissues to wipe this up." As Sophia went to get tissues, Kiran observed that the water didn't penetrate the fabric but simply flowed down. He glanced at Yvonne, who shared the same strange expression. Macy, standing nearby, had a fleeting look of coldness in her eyes. Kiran concluded that Randall's relapse was linked to the loungewear. He began unbuttoning it. As soon as he touched the fabric, he felt something alive inside, accompanied by a pungent stench. Joshua was the first to react, pinching his nose and covering his mouth, starting to retch. Chapter 905. Yvonne Quinn pulled Joshua and Sophia Carter aside, distancing them from Macy Wendell. Kiran York forcefully tore open Randall Carter's loungewear, revealing his body beneath. Randall's skin had turned black and was starting to rot. White worms crawled slowly over his skin, making a nauseating sight. Joshua and Sophia covered their mouths, retching at the sight. Macy, however, remained calm and indifferent. Kiran took out an antidote pill and placed it in Randall's mouth, which seemed to stabilize him slightly. Yvonne also applied her own goo poison antidote, scattering it over Randall's body. However, her antidote seemed to react badly, dropping off and dying upon contact. Randall's body convulsed violently, and he began to vomit blood, on the verge of death once more. "What's happening to my father?" Sophia cried out, unable to bear the pressure, turning to Kiran for answers. Kiran's expression was extremely grave, filled with anger. He asked, "Where did this loungewear come from?" "I bought it from the market," Macy finally replied. "You bought it from the market?" Kiran's voice was icy with anger as he stared at. "Yes, I bought it from the market," Macy repeated calmly. She then looked at Kiran and asked, "It's just a piece of clothing. What's the problem?" "Why does this clothing contain a 1,000-year corpse goo?" Yvonne asked angrily. Macy's face showed a trace of astonishment as she replied, "What's a 1,000-year corpse goo? I've never heard of it." Joshua and Sophia looked at Yvonne in confusion, waiting for an explanation. "The 1,000-year corpse goo is a type of goo worm raised on a dead body, reviving repeatedly within the corpse," Yvonne explained. "Raised for 1,000 years," Macy scoffed. "Where would you find a 1,000-year-old corpse? That's absurd." Macy looked at Yvonne with distrust. "The 1,000-year corpse goo isn't something modern people raise." "It's passed down," Yvonne continued, focusing on Macy. Macy shook her head, feigning ignorance. "How would I know what you're talking about? I've never heard of it." She then turned to Kiran and asked, "Do you think I would know about such a poison?" Kiran was completely stunned by this woman's audacity. She acted as if it had nothing to do with her. He stared at Macy and asked, "Do you know where your heavenly silkworm goo came from?" Macy looked bewildered and shook her head. "If I knew where it came from, wouldn't I have gotten rid of it by now?" She showed a hint of anger, saying, "It's all those Maui tribe people always playing with goo poison." She glared at Yvonne as if blaming her for the goo poison. Yvonne ignored this and replied, "Regardless of the situation, if you can transfer your heavenly silkworm goo to Randall, he can survive." Macy laughed coldly. "You said you could cure him, but now he's worse. And now you say it's a 1,000-year corpse goo. Why should I believe you?" She looked at Joshua and Sophia and said, "Don't believe them. They're lying and shifting the blame." Joshua and Sophia were torn, not knowing whom to trust. Macy was their mother and wouldn't let their father be harmed. Naturally, they wanted to believe her. However, Kiran and Yvonne had been helping them, and they wouldn't lie. Both looked at the three adults, unsure what to say. "He's your husband. Whether you want to save him is up to you," Yvonne said, crossing her arms and waiting for Macy's decision. Kiran stood aside as well. Joshua and Sophia saw Kiran and Yvonne stepping back and became anxious. They turned to Macy, pleading, "Mom, please save Dad." "Children, if I could save your father, I would have done it already," Macy said, tears streaming down her face. "Kiran and Yvonne are lying. They can't save your father and are now blaming others." Joshua and Sophia were even more conflicted, looking at Kiran and pleading, "Mr. York, please save our father." Kiran remained silent, staring at Macy, recalling her earlier attempt to stop the rescue. He was now certain that Macy never wanted Randall to wake up. He looked at her with disdain and said, "This is your family's issue." "I'm done." Kiran picked up the loungewear and told Yvonne, "Let's go. We're done here." Yvonne nodded and followed Kiran to leave. Sophia was frantic. She rushed forward, blocking their path, and cried, "Master, mistress, please save my father." She dropped to her knees, followed by Joshua, who begged, "Young Master York, if you save my father, I'll give you my life." Kiran, moved by their sincerity, said, "Burn this loungewear and I'll save your father." Sophia and Joshua were overjoyed. "I'll burn it myself," Sophia said, reaching for the loungewear, unafraid of the poison. "Bring a basin and a lighter." "I'll burn it," Yvonne instructed. Sophia and Joshua quickly fetched the items. Sophia brought the lighter, and Joshua brought the basin. Yvonne placed the loungewear in the basin and took the lighter, ready to ignite it. Macy, who had been silent, suddenly shouted coldly, "This is my house. What do you think you're doing?" "We're trying to save your husband," Yvonne replied, flicking the lighter. "Don't save him," Macy screamed in rage. Joshua and Sophia were stunned. Chapter 906. Don't save our father? Joshua and Sophia Carter felt like they were in a dream, unable to believe these words came from their mother. They were more shocked than if struck by lightning, staring at their mother in astonishment. "Randall Carter is your husband. Don't you want to save him?" Yvonne Quinn asked Macy Wendell, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Because he is my husband, I have the right to decide whether to save him or not," Macy replied coldly, looking at Yvonne. "Even one day as a couple is equivalent to 100 days of intimacy, yet you're this heartless," Yvonne mocked. "I don't need you to interfere. Get out of our house now," Macy said, not bothering to pretend anymore and openly confronting Yvonne and Kiran York. "Mom, that's Dad. Didn't you say you were hoping for him to wake up?" Sophia couldn't bear it anymore and cried out to her mother. "Of course, I know he's your father, and his name is Randall Carter, but he's better off dead than alive," Macy said coldly, looking at Kiran and Yvonne. "You bringing him back to life will only bring him pain. It's better to let him die." "If it weren't for the 1,000-year corpse goo, he would be fine now," Yvonne said, looking at the loungewear in the basin. "I don't understand how you could be so heartless as to inflict such a vicious goo poison on him." "I didn't poison him, and I didn't know this clothing had the 1,000-year corpse goo," Macy continued to deny. "Whether you know or not, you're aware of the truth," Yvonne said, focusing on Macy. "Now burn the clothes and eliminate the 1,000-year corpse goo, and maybe he can survive." "Survive? What if the poison spreads to others? He's better off dead," Macy insisted firmly. Yvonne looked at Kiran without saying anything further. Kiran stared at Macy and said, "You should explain the origin of your heavenly silkworm goo and the 1,000-year corpse goo on him." "I don't know. There's nothing to explain," Macy said, looking at the white loungewear. "This was a piece of clothing left here by Cedric Brew. He said it was good, so I kept it." "I didn't know it had goo poison." Kiran and Yvonne were slightly taken aback, not expecting Macy to push the blame onto Cedric. "I don't care about all this nonsense." "I just want to save my father," Joshua shouted at his mother. "Shut up! This isn't up to you," Macy snapped at Joshua angrily. Joshua clenched his fists, his teeth grinding audibly in anger. "Master, please save my father," Sophia pleaded with Kiran, tears streaming down her face. Kiran looked at Yvonne and said, "You burn the clothes. I'll control the goo poison." Yvonne nodded. Just as they were about to act, Macy's rage boiled over. She moved quickly to Randall's side. Kiran didn't stop her but smiled coldly. Macy raised her hand, ready to strike Randall's head. Joshua and Sophia were stunned, unable to believe their mother was about to kill their father. The disbelief in their eyes was clear. That was their father. With a loud bang, Kiran blocked Macy's hand just as it was about to strike. "That's my dad," Sophia cried, rushing forward to protect her father with her body. Yvonne, worried about poisoning, quickly pulled Sophia back. Macy, her expression icy, glared at Kiran. "You're meddling in things you shouldn't. Be careful you don't meet a bad end." Kiran remained calm. It doesn't matter how much I meddle. What matters is you can't kill Randall. He's my husband. I decide his life and death, not you, Macy said, glancing at Joshua and Sophia. I decide his fate, and you have no right to interfere. We're adults. We have the right to interfere, Sophia said, tears streaming down her face. Then die with him, Macy said in a fit of rage, raising her hand to strike Joshua. Joshua stood frozen, unable to believe his mother would kill him. That was his mother, the woman who gave birth to him. Did she have no humanity? Just as Macy's fist was about to strike Joshua's face, Kiran raised his hand, silver needles shooting toward Macy's fist. If Macy continued, she would be hit by the needles. Reluctantly, she pulled back her fist and glared at Kiran. You're clever, not falling for my trick. Kiran said, You were distracting us to kill Randall. Killing him is your true goal. Kiran stared at Macy and coldly asked, Why would a woman be so intent on killing her own husband? What's your motive? Mom, are you under a goo poison? Losing your mind? Sophia asked, as if in a dream, looking at her mother with tearful eyes. I'm not crazy. I just want to kill Randall. You don't need to interfere, Macy said, looking at Kiran and Yvonne. If you can watch him all the time, great. Otherwise, I will kill him. Macy turned and left calmly, not caring about their reactions. Joshua and Sophia were left stunned, staring at their mother, unsure what to say. Kiran, on the other hand, smiled wider, realizing Macy had many secrets, possibly linked to Lady Meiji. Thinking of this possibility filled Kiran with anticipation. Yvonne started burning the clothes, helping to eliminate the 1,000-year corpse goo. Kiran assisted in detoxification. An hour later, Randall slowly opened his eyes. Seeing Joshua and Sophia, he wasn't as happy as expected but anxiously looked around for Macy. Not seeing her, he asked, disappointed, Where is your mother? Joshua and Sophia, recalling Macy's cruelty, felt heartbroken and couldn't respond, eventually breaking into tears. She tried to kill you, but we stopped her, Yvonne said to Randall. I deserve to die. Don't blame her, Randall said, looking sad rather than angry. Everyone was stunned by his response. Chapter 907. After a brief silence, Sophia Carter looked anxiously at her father and asked, Dad, what's going on? Why did Mom suddenly try to kill you? Randall slowly sat up on the bed and looked at Sophia and Joshua. His face finally showed a faint smile, but it was a bitter one. The fact that you two were born safely is my greatest blessing. As he spoke, tears of sorrow appeared on his face. Kiran York watched Randall's expression and asked, Do you think you shouldn't have fallen in love with Macy Wendell? Randall shook his head and replied, It's not that I shouldn't have fallen in love with Macy, it's that I never deserved to love her. What do you mean? Sophia asked, tears streaming down her face. You're still young. There are things you wouldn't understand, Randall sighed, then turned to Kiran and Yvonne Quinn, saying, You two must have saved me, right? Both nodded. Someone like me is better off dead than alive, Randall continued. I never thought the son of the prestigious Carter family would feel unworthy of Macy Wendell. Yvonne, who had been silent, suddenly spoke. In the face of love, there is no status, only worthiness. Besides being beautiful, what does Macy have? Kiran asked, puzzled. I desecrated Macy's purity. It's natural for her to hate me, Randall said, a look of regret crossing his face. Kiran and Yvonne exchanged a glance, both showing a trace of anticipation. It seemed Macy had more secrets. Did you take advantage of her innocence back then? Yvonne asked, seemingly enlightened. Randall's expression became more complex, but to everyone's surprise, he nodded. If I hadn't taken advantage of her vulnerability, how could I have gotten Macy? Sophia and Joshua's faces changed as they looked at their father. Spring wind and dewdrops meet by chance, and it surpasses countless human encounters. This must be what describes you, Kiran joked, looking at Randall. Randall wasn't embarrassed, but nodded forcefully. When I was traveling in Maui, I met Macy in a hotel. She was naked, and I was so stunned by her beauty that I lost control and took her. Sophia and Joshua gasped, finding it hard to believe their parents got together like that. Kiran and Yvonne exchanged a delighted look. As if discovering a new continent, perhaps the heavenly silkworm goo left one defenseless upon resurrection? At that time, Macy must have been defenseless, right? Yvonne asked Randall. Randall was stunned. How did you know? Yvonne became more certain about the characteristics of the heavenly silkworm goo. No wonder Macy hated Randall so much. Why didn't she kill you then? Kiran asked. I don't know. She was furious and distressed for a while, and several times she tried to kill me but always stopped in the end, Randall said, puzzled. Then you both came back together, right? Yvonne inquired. Randall nodded. Yes, her willingness to come back with me was unexpected, and later we had Joshua. And how did Sophia come into the picture? Kiran asked curiously. Joshua was born when we were together. As for Sophia, I have no idea, Randall admitted. You don't know how your daughter was conceived? Kiran and Yvonne were stunned. Sophia looked embarrassed, glancing at her father. Randall took a deep breath and explained, "After Joshua was born, every time I tried to be with Macy, I would quickly fall into a state of unconsciousness and not remember anything." Everyone in the room gasped, shocked. "How did you fall unconscious?" Kiran pressed. "At a family banquet, I met Cedric Brew. Afterward, I came back and fell unconscious. I don't know why," Randall replied. Yvonne rested her chin on her hand, pondering for a while before saying to Kiran, "It seems Macy is the root cause of Randall's coma. Cedric Brew's goo poison was just an excuse." "Master, mistress, what's going on? Why did my mom do this to my dad?" Sophia asked, tearfully looking at Kiran and Yvonne. "We're not sure yet, but it seems your mother is much older than us, much older," Yvonne said, her brows furrowed. "You mean her heavenly silkworm goo revives every 20 years and she's actually very old?" Sophia asked Yvonne for confirmation. Yvonne nodded. "That's very likely. And because your father accidentally took her body, she hates him." After a pause, Yvonne continued, "However, because she had Joshua with your father, she didn't kill him." Joshua's face alternated between red and white. He then asked Yvonne, "Then how did my sister come about?" Yvonne shook her head. "I don't know. Only your mother can explain." "Why not do a DNA test?" Sophia suggested, feeling the situation was disgraceful and looking firmly at Yvonne. Yvonne shook her head again. "The test result isn't the point. The key is to understand your mother's true intentions." Yvonne turned to Randall and asked, "Before you were poisoned by Cedric Brew, did Macy ever try to kill you?" "There were 3 times. The first was when she was 3 months pregnant. She stopped due to severe pregnancy symptoms. The second time was when Joshua was about to be born. She stopped when he was born. The third time was before I fell into a coma. I was about to attend a family banquet when her phone rang and she stopped," Randall recounted. Hearing about the 3 close calls, the room fell silent again. Chapter 908. "It seems the heavens have been looking out for you, letting you survive each time," Yvonne Quinn said to Randall Carter with a teasing smile. Randall's face flushed with embarrassment, not understanding Yvonne's meaning. "Just now was her 4th attempt to kill you. We stopped her, but she said you must die," Yvonne continued, looking at Randall. Hearing this, Randall remained calm and replied, "It's not her fault. I deserve to die. If she wants to kill me, let her." He then turned to his children, Joshua and Sophia, and said, "If your mother ever kills me, don't hate her. It's my own fault." Joshua and Sophia were stunned, staring at their father. How deep must his love for their mother be? But their mother was so cruel. Randall smiled bitterly. "When you make a mistake, you have to face the consequences and pay for it." Joshua and Sophia were speechless, remaining silent. "I appreciate you two for waking me up so I could see my children again. Now you can leave," Randall said, seemingly having come to terms with life, looking at Kiran York and Yvonne. Joshua and Sophia showed signs of embarrassment, about to persuade their father otherwise, but Kiran and Yvonne nodded and left without a word. Sophia hurriedly followed them outside. "Master, mistress, thank you." Kiran shook his head slightly. "It's nothing, don't worry." Sophia still felt a bit awkward. Yvonne pulled Kiran into the car and they drove off. In the car, Yvonne asked Kiran, "Do you find this situation strange? If I'm not mistaken, Macy Wendell seems more like Lady Meiji," Kiran said, looking at Yvonne. "You mean her heavenly silkworm goo and her age?" Yvonne asked, frowning at Kiran. "The heavenly silkworm goo is rare, and the 1,000-year corpse goo is even harder to find. Combining the two, Macy is a miraculous existence," Kiran speculated. Yvonne pondered deeply before looking at Kiran. If that's the case, she must hate Randall for ruining her plans. "I think defiling her was one reason, but more importantly, he disrupted her plans," Kiran said thoughtfully. "I also believe Sophia might hold even greater secrets." "Sophia? What secrets could she have?" Yvonne asked, puzzled and clearly unconvinced. "Maybe Macy placed all her hopes on Sophia. Otherwise, why would she have another child with someone she hates so much?" Kiran explained. Yvonne fell silent, contemplating Kiran's words. "If that's true, Sophia could be in danger," Yvonne said, looking at Kiran. Kiran suddenly hit the brakes and quickly turned the car around, heading back to Randall's house. Yvonne began dialing Sophia's number, but no one answered. She then called Joshua, who quickly picked up. "Miss Quinn, what's the matter?" "Where is your sister, Sophia? Let her answer the phone," Yvonne asked. "She's in our father's room." "I'll get her," Joshua said, running upstairs. Entering the room, Joshua saw his father lying on the bed, bleeding from his orifices. "Dad." He dropped the phone in shock, his scream echoing through the phone. Yvonne urgently asked, "What's happening?" "My father is bleeding from his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. It looks like he's dead," Joshua said, his voice trembling with fear. "We're coming back now," Yvonne said, hanging up. Kiran floored the accelerator, racing back to Sophia's home. When they arrived, they found Joshua staring blankly at them, unable to speak. Kiran quickly checked Randall and found him dead, his body already cold. "He's dead," Yvonne said, her voice heavy with sorrow. "Did my mother really kill my father?" Joshua muttered, trying to control his emotions. "Where's Sophia?" Kiran asked. "I don't know. I haven't seen her," Joshua replied, his eyes vacant but searching. "No need to look. Your mother probably killed your father and took Sophia," Yvonne said confidently. Joshua looked as if he'd been struck by lightning, collapsing in shock, his spirit crushed. Having his father around, even in a coma, had been a pillar of strength. Now his father was dead, and his mother was the murderer. The reality was unbearable. "Let's lay your father to rest," Kiran suggested to Joshua. Joshua, regaining a bit of composure, called someone for help. Kiran helped dress Randall's body. When they turned Randall over, they noticed a red map of mountain ranges on his back. Yvonne saw it too and moved closer to examine it. Kiran and Yvonne studied the map and exclaimed in unison, "Isn't this Kiran Mountain in Dragon City?" They carefully analyzed the map. Yvonne took a photo of it. Kiran noticed a cave on the map, different from what he remembered, located a few hundred meters southeast. Curious, Kiran memorized the map. Strangely, the map began to fade before their eyes until it disappeared. Kiran and Yvonne were filled with curiosity. After dressing Randall, they left with the body. Once Joshua's people arrived, they took Randall away. Leaving the Carter house, Kiran and Yvonne were both excited. Kiran drove straight to Dragon's Mount, convinced the map held vital information and possibly connected to the remaining 6 dragon veins. Chapter 909. Under the dark, misty night sky, Kiran York and Yvonne Quinn made their way toward the Kiran Cave on Dragon's Mount. Despite Yvonne's poor health, her upbringing in the Maui region made her adept at navigating the rugged mountain paths. However, to speed up their journey, Kiran decided to carry her. Embracing the situation, Yvonne wrapped her arms around Kiran's neck and later straddled his waist, snuggling into his embrace. Although Kiran found it a bit hard to breathe, his focus remained on investigating the mysterious map they had seen on Randall Carter's back. Meanwhile, Yvonne enjoyed the warmth and intimacy of being carried by him. After about 20 minutes, they reached the Kiran Cave. The cave was dark and a foul smell emanated from within, reminding Kiran of the previous incidents involving Chi Gang's head and the death of the Murphy family head at the hands of Lady Meiji. "Put me down. Let's search together," Yvonne softly suggested in Kiran's ear. Kiran gently set her down, and Yvonne planted a kiss on his cheek. "Thank you, dear," she said, making Kiran smile wryly. They began to search around, heading southeast as indicated by the map. Kiran led the way, holding Yvonne's hand. "You've been carrying me and holding my hand all the way. Are you falling for me?" Yvonne teased. Kiran didn't respond verbally, but he squeezed her hand, making her laugh. After walking for about 10 minutes, Kiran stopped. "According to the map, we should have reached the spot by now." Yvonne scanned the area but saw nothing but trees and grass. "Maybe we came at the wrong time?" Kiran pondered for a moment. "What if there's another cave inside the Kiran Cave?" Yvonne's eyes lit up. "You might be right. Chi Gang's coffin was placed in a prime location. Let's go back and check." They retraced their steps but strangely couldn't find the cave, which was unsettling since they had just passed it. They had been to the Kiran Cave more than once and were very familiar with it. How could they not find it? "Are we lost? Is this some kind of illusion?" Yvonne asked, squeezing Kiran's hand. "Maybe you should urinate to break it." Kiran rolled his eyes. "It needs to be a virgin's urine, not mine. Would a maiden's work?" Yvonne laughed, her bell-like laughter echoing eerily in the valley. Kiran York immediately felt that something was wrong. There wasn't such a loud echo on the Kiran Mountain, so why was it so loud? Realizing something was off, Kiran asked her to laugh again. This time the echo was even louder, revealing they were standing on soft soil instead of the grass they had walked on earlier. "Could we already be inside the cave?" Yvonne wondered, reaching for her phone. Kiran stopped her. "Let's keep it dark. We need to understand what's happening here." Yvonne put away her phone and looked at Kiran. "How about we follow this dirt road?" "I think so too," Kiran York said. "In any case, I'm not afraid of being with you. Even if we die, we can still be buried together." Yvonne Quinn held Kiran York's hand tightly, a blissful expression on her face. Kiran York didn't say anything and just walked with her. As the two of them did not have flashlights, they could only rely on the feeling under their feet. They continued walking along the soft soil, which gradually turned into hard ground and then rocky terrain. Wearing high heels, Yvonne struggled, prompting Kiran to offer, "Climb on my back." She complied, and he carried her piggyback. Surprisingly, her hands, usually cold, felt warm, making Kiran curious. "Yvonne, do you remember when we first met?" Kiran asked. It was during the competition for the medical insurance supplies, right? Yvonne replied. Relieved, Kiran confirmed it was indeed Yvonne he was carrying. Her sudden warmth was puzzling, though. Kiran, I'm getting hot. I want to take off my coat, Yvonne said, unzipping her jacket. Kiran felt a surge of excitement. Perhaps something here could improve Yvonne's health, which even his medical skills couldn't fully treat. They continued walking for half an hour until they saw a faint red light in the distance, resembling the dawn's first rays. This sight filled them with hope. Chapter 910. Kiran York quickened his pace, and, after about half an hour, found himself standing before a pool of blood-red liquid. The glow from the liquid illuminated the surroundings. Yvonne Quinn slid down from Kiran's back, and they stood side by side, surveying the area. The surroundings were barren, without a single blade of grass, and the red liquid resembled boiling water. Both thought of volcanic lava, especially Yvonne, who could feel the heat and her body starting to change. It seems my body can accept the heat now. If the heat is enough, I can warm up, Yvonne said, teasingly adding, it's just us here in the quiet night. How about I strip down for you? I won't feel cold. Kiran gave her a stern look. Is this really the time for jokes? Yvonne smiled brightly. Of course I'm happy. We've weathered so much together and I'm always by your side. That's a blessing. Even though you love Snowzander, just being by your side makes me content, she continued. Feeling awkward, Kiran walked towards the red liquid. As he approached, the liquid began to bubble more violently, almost as if it sensed danger. Could this be lava? Yvonne asked, peering at the red liquid. It can't be lava. If it were, there would be more of it, and it wouldn't be here, Kiran replied. Then what is it? Could it be some elixir? Should we taste it? Yvonne teased, leaning forward as if to drink it. Kiran quickly pulled her back. Are you crazy? Do you want to die? I was just trying to help you, Yvonne smiled. I don't want you to try it. Despite his frustration, Kiran knew Yvonne's concern was genuine. The energy Qigang's tomb absorbed might not be from incense, but from this, he speculated. Yvonne nodded seriously. I suspect this liquid holds a mysterious power. As she moved, she remarked, Look at me. I'm practically stripping down because it's so hot here. I've never worn so little except when bathing. Kiran noticed Yvonne's figure, her curves now more defined and alluring, her pale, sickly look replaced with vibrant beauty. Hey, are you admiring me? If you want to make love, just say so. Yvonne teased, lightening the mood. Kiran rolled his eyes. I'm trying to figure out what's changing you. Should I jump in and take a bath? What if I turn into a skeleton? Yvonne joked, moving towards the red liquid. Yvonne appeared playful and mischievous, making a move as if she were about to leap into the pool of red liquid. Her sudden action startled Kiran, who instinctively reached out and pulled her into his arms to prevent her from jumping. Her delicate body fit naturally against Kiran's, and with a sly smile she leaned in and extended her tongue towards his mouth. Kiran, surprised by her boldness, instinctively turned his head to avoid her advance. However, standing so close to the magma-like pool, he found himself inexplicably unable to move, as if an unseen force was holding him in place. Kiran stood frozen, his mind racing to understand the strange phenomenon, when Yvonne's tongue had already found its way into his mouth. Despite his initial urge to push her away, he felt an overwhelming sensation, as if a thirsty man in a desert had finally found water. He found it difficult to let go, and soon they were passionately kissing, completely lost in each other. As they kissed, oblivious to their surroundings, the red liquid in the pool began to boil more vigorously. Wisps of vapor rose from the surface and swirled around them, eventually seeping into their bodies. The more they kissed, the more the vapor enveloped them, infusing them with a strange, fiery energy. After an indeterminate amount of time, the boiling liquid gradually solidified, forming a layer of red stone. Kiran and Yvonne remained locked in their embrace, their bodies glowing with a reddish hue. Kiran. Eventually, Yvonne softly called out Kiran's name. He slowly opened his eyes to find her gazing at him with a look of wonder. Her face, previously pale and frail, now had a healthy, vibrant glow. You see, the liquid has disappeared, Yvonne said, pointing to where the boiling pool had been. Kiran looked and saw that the liquid had indeed solidified into red stones, similar to the ones he had seen on Dragon's Mount. He began to understand that the boiling liquid was the unformed essence of the precious stones. Could it be that the energy within was too potent to solidify? Yvonne asked, her curiosity evident. Whatever the reason, it seems we've absorbed its power and grown stronger, Kiran replied, deep in thought. Yvonne nodded. Yes, it feels like that energy has fully integrated into our bodies. I think that was why Qigang's coffin was placed here, to harness this energy. Unfortunately, they never found it. Kiran speculated. Maybe Macy Wendell stayed with Randall Carter to access this energy, Yvonne suggested. If that's the case, it's strange how Randall ended up with the map on his back, Kiran said, furrowing his brow in contemplation. You two absorbed the dragon's saliva? A cold voice suddenly cut through the air. They turned to see Macy Wendell standing at the entrance, her eyes filled with icy disdain.